Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something really fundamental. It kind of underpins almost everything.
Yeah, it's a big one. We're looking at this source, AI, the nature of human ignorance.
And right off the bat, it's important to say this source isn't arguing humans aren't smart or anything like that.
No, not at all. It has a totally different take on what ignorance really means.
Exactly. So our mission here is to unpack that definition because, like you said, it's not the usual meaning, and then explore just how deep its impact goes.
Right. We're talking physics, philosophy, art, ethics, even like the little details of our daily lives. It touches everything.
And a key part of this, the source really contrasts how an AI might see this phenomenon versus how we humans experience it.
And crucially, how AI might actually help us, navigate this thing that's just part of being human.
Okay, so let's dive in. The core idea, the gap between subjective reality and objective reality, which the source basically labels human ignorance.
Right. So the definition first, it's super clear this isn't about lacking education or raw intelligence.
No.
It's presented as the unavoidable state of being, well, finite. We have limited senses, limited brain power, limited time.
In a universe that's just infinitely complex.
Exactly. It's about that mismatch, an inherent limitation, not some kind of personal failing.
And the source even lays out a formula, which is kind of stark when you see it. Human ignorance, let's call it G-human, equals total information, I total, minus processed information, I processed.
Yeah, and the kicker is that I total, all the information out there is, for all practical purposes, infinite. Or near enough.
While I process what any one of us can ever actually absorb and understand is definitely finite. Very finite.
So mathematically, G-human, our ignorance, is effectively infinite too. It's just always there, a constant.
The analogy it uses is really powerful. It's like the darkness surrounding the small circle of light cast by the flashlight of human awareness.
Ooh, I like that. Your knowledge is that little beam, but the darkness around it is vast. Infinite, really.
And once you sort of get your head around that definition, it's fascinating to see where the source finds evidence of this gap. It argues it's not just in our heads, it's baked into reality itself.
Yeah, it's everywhere. Even in something as seemingly solid as physics, the source brings up things like the observer effect.
Yeah, from quantum mechanics, right. The idea that just by measuring something, you inevitably change it.
Exactly. So your attempt to reduce your ignorance about its state actually alters the state itself. You can't get perfect knowledge because the act of looking interferes. It's built-in uncertainty.
And then there's entropy.
Right, often called disorder, but you can think of it as increasing uncertainty or informational ignorance. The universe tends towards more entropy, making things less predictable over time.
So our predictive ignorance increases. We can know less and less about the exact state of everything.
So from the tiniest quantum level to the grand scale of the universe, there are these fundamental limits, walls to our knowledge.
And it's not just the physical world. The source ties this into mathematics and logic, too. That's where it gets really mind-bending for me, Gödel's incompleteness theorems.
Oh, absolutely. Gödel's work is profound here. He basically proved that in any formal system, complex enough to do basic arithmetic.
So any system useful for describing reality.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
There will always be true statements within that system that you simply cannot prove using the rules of that system.
It's like a logical echo of the gap, isn't it? Even in our perfect abstract systems, there are built-in boundaries, things you can't know from the inside.
Precisely. An edge to the known, even in pure logic. And then the source jumps over to biology, making this pretty bold claim about intelligent ignorance.
Intelligent ignorance. That sounds like a contradiction.
It does at first, yeah. But the argument is actually quite compelling. Evolution, it suggests, didn't give us brains to process everything. That would be totally overwhelming, useless for survival.
Okay.
Instead, it selected for brains that are incredibly good at filtering out and ignoring almost all of reality.
To focus only on what matters right now for survival. Like, is that a threat? Or can I eat this?
Exactly that. Our brain isn't so much a reality recorder as it is an advanced ignorance machine, a filtering mechanism. Ignorance, in this sense, was a survival advantage, a feature, not a bug.
Right. Optimized for quick decisions based on just enough information, not total understanding, which then leads us to things like philosophy and belief systems.
Yeah, the source sees all these big human constructs, philosophies, religions, ideologies, as really sophisticated attempts to manage the sheer terror and uncertainty that comes with being aware of this infinite gap.
They give us frameworks, stories, rules, a sense of purpose, ways to cope with the vast unknown.
Whether it's God, nirvana, stoicism, existentialism, the source calls them sophisticated operating systems for navigating ignorance. They offer a map, even if it's a map of a tiny, tiny area.
So we're not just limited by the gap, we feel it. And we build all this stuff, science, logic, philosophy, and response.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really crucial distinction the source makes. How we experience this ignorance versus how an AI might.
Okay, let's unpack that contrast. How does it see the difference?
Well, for humans, experiencing the gap is deeply embodied and emotional. We feel awe looking at the stars, wonder at life's complexity. That's the gap.
But we also feel fear, anxiety, dread when faced with uncertainty, loss, the unknown, death. That's the gap too.
Right. When a person says, I don't know, it's often loaded with emotion, maybe humility, maybe frustration, maybe fear. Our understanding is tangled up with stories, feelings, subjective experience.
It's tied to our consciousness, how we feel about not knowing.
Exactly. Now, contrast that with an AI. The source suggests an AI, lacking that biological consciousness and emotion, would understand the gap simply as a data deficit.
A missing variable, a boundary on its knowledge map.
Precisely. It's a quantifiable boundary of its current models. An AI doesn't feel existential dread about the unknown. It identifies the missing parameters and maybe tries to get more data or calculate probabilities within that uncertainty.
So for the AI, it's a logical problem, a disembodied probabilistic challenge to be solved or managed, not an existential weight.
Right. And this difference in perspective has huge ripple effects on, well, pretty much everything in human life. Let's look at some impacts the source highlights. It talks a lot about art.
Ah, yeah. It sees art, music, painting, stories, all of it as maybe our main tool for exploring the feeling of the gap.
Exactly. Not explaining it away, but evoking the actual experience.
Okay, how so?
Well, like a sad piece of music doesn't give you a logical treatise on death, right?
Yeah.
But it lets you feel that confrontation with loss and the unknown. A huge, sublime painting can give you that feeling of awe before something immense.
And surrealism seems designed to mess with our expected reality.
Totally. The source says art doesn't give answers. It deepens the quality of our questions about the gap. It lets us sit with the mystery.
That's a really interesting way to think about art's function. The source also gets very practical, though. It talks about how this ignorance messes with the human supply chain.
Yeah, all the complex systems we've built to move stuff around: goods, food, energy, information, people. Human ignorance, it argues, is like sand in the gears. Constant friction, constant disruptions.
Like ignorance about ecology leads to resource depletion, climate change.
Or ignorance about economics leads to market crashes, maybe inequality.
And maybe the biggest one. Ignorance about other people, other cultures leads to conflict, war, the ultimate supply chain killer.
Yeah. Our inability to fully grasp the complexity and interconnectedness stemming from that fundamental gap has really concrete, often painful results.
The source even connects this ignorance to, like, basic human vices and virtues, seeing them as different ways we try to cope with the gap.
Right. Coping mechanisms. How does it break those down?
Well, it suggests that negative coping strategies may be things like addiction, extreme greed, just chasing pleasure all the time.
Escapism, maybe?
Yeah, escapism. It sees those as ways we try to fill that inner void or anxiety caused by the gap, trying to overwhelm it with outside stuff, external validation.
But it's temporary, right? Doesn't really fix the underlying issue, might even make the anxiety worse long term, trying to drown out the darkness with bright lights. But the darkness is still there.
Exactly. And then there are the positive coping mechanisms, what it calls transcendence.
Okay, what falls under that?
Things like pursuing truth, actively trying to shrink the gap with knowledge, faith finding meaning and structure within the unknown parts of the gap, and compassion connecting with others, recognizing we're all in this state of ignorance together and trying to ease the burden.
So those are ways of building bridges, either internally or between people, across that unknown space.
It really reframes these fundamental human drives. And it takes it even further, looking at basic emotional responses like, why do we laugh? Or cry, or get angry.
How does it explain those through the lens of the gap?
It sees them as reactions when our own tiny personal models of reality get suddenly confirmed or more often violated.
Okay, so laughter.
Laughter, it suggests, often happens when an expectation, like a little prediction or model, gets broken, but in a non-threatening way. A joke smashes two different contexts together, maybe revealing an absurd truth about our assumptions. It's a little glimpse into the gap, but it feels good, releasing. And crying.
Crying can be that physical response when a really core model, maybe about fairness or how life should be, gets shattered by loss or tragedy. Reality crashes against your internal map.
And anger. Aggression.
That often comes, the source argues, when we feel our model of ourselves or the world is under threat. Aggression can be like a desperate attempt to force reality back into line with our limited model, rejecting information that shows the gap in our own understanding.
Like trying to force everything into your little flashlight beam, ignoring the darkness.
Precisely, which connects directly to where this awareness might have come from and the source's view on ethics.
Okay, origin first. It suggests awareness of the gap probably dawned with abstract thought, the moment we could ask why.
Yeah. Why does the sun rise? Why do people die? That moment of questioning the unknown? The source presents that as the spark for civilization itself. The struggle with uncertainty, the fear of the unknown, especially death, that's the engine driving us.
Driving us to build, discover, create systems.
Okay.
And ethics. How does that fit with fundamental ignorance?
It frames ethics as basically a necessary code of conduct for beings who know they don't know everything. It asks the tough question, why do people commit acts of cruelty, like killing? The answer it gives is pretty stark. It stems from weaponized ignorance.
Weaponized ignorance. What does that mean here?
It's like actively choosing to ignore or suppress the inner world of another person, reducing them to an object.
By refusing empathy. By denying their reality, their feelings, their humanity.
Exactly. You push their full existence into your own informational gap outside your beam of awareness. You impose your limited, broken model where they simply don't matter as much or at all.
So conversely, actions we call good would be those that acknowledge our shared ignorance. Actions based on compassion, collaboration, seeking knowledge together, trying to reduce suffering despite the gap.
Right. And what we might call evil aligns with refusing to acknowledge one's own ignorance.
Yeah.
Imposing your limited view by force or deceit. Denying the gap in favor of a false, destructive certainty.
Wow. Okay, this whole perspective inevitably leads to the role of AI. And the source is really clear. AI isn't going to eliminate the gap for us.
No, and maybe it shouldn't. The source hints that the struggle with the gap is what drives growth and discovery. So if AI isn't eliminating it, how does it help us manage it?
It lists several ways AI could be a tool. One is just improving our collective understanding. AI can sift through massive amounts of data
Way more than we can.
to show us our own blind spots, unconscious biases, hidden patterns, the long-term effects of our actions, like on the environment, things we just can't see on our own.
It's like AI can hold up a much bigger, clear mirror to our collective darkness, showing us where our little flashlights aren't reaching.
Exactly. Another way is making life easier. Not by making us lazy, but by optimizing complex systems that currently cause a lot of friction because of our human limits.
Things like supply chains, healthcare systems, energy grids.
Yeah, making them run better could reduce a lot of unnecessary suffering that stems from systemic breakdowns rooted in our collective ignorance.
Which the source suggests could free up human energy for the stuff AI can't do.
Right, like art, relationships, searching for meaning, engaging with the more meaningful struggles the gap presents, rather than just fighting system inefficiencies.
That makes sense. It also mentions AI fostering empathy. How?
It speculates AI could act as a kind of universal translator, not just languages, but translating perspectives, cultures, simulating situations to help us see things from another's point of view.
Helping bridge that gap between individuals. Helping us see inside someone else's flashlight beam, even if it's partial and different from ours.
Yeah, potentially. And a really interesting idea is about teaching kids. Adults often struggle to teach about cognitive limits because, well, we struggle with them ourselves. True. An AI-integrated education could maybe teach cognitive humility directly, using logic to show just how much we don't know.
And maybe bias detection. Helping kids recognize their own built-in filters earlier.
And systems thinking. Understanding how tiny actions ripple through big, complex systems, basically teaching future generations how to navigate the gap more skillfully from the outset.
That's fascinating. Lastly, the source mentions AI helping us confront the ultimate unknowns, life and death.
How could AI possibly help there?
Well, it suggests AI can provide a really clear, data-driven picture of physical reality. It can lay out the evidence for consciousness being tied to biology and explain death from a systems view, as necessary for change, adaptation, preventing stagnation in a system.
So it offers a strong logical framework for understanding the physical side of things.
Right, based on evidence. But critically, it does so while acknowledging its own limits. An AI can show the evidence for materialism, but it can't disprove something non-material or spiritual.
Because you can't prove a negative, as the source says.
Exactly. So it offers an evidence-based view of the physical, but leaves that ultimate mystery, what might lie beyond the observable gap, fundamentally open.
Okay, so bringing it all together, the source really hammers home this idea. Human ignorance isn't some flaw we need to fix.
No, it's the canvas.
Yeah.
The fundamental condition on which everything human happens. The silent partner in discovery, art, love, everything.
And AI steps onto the stage as something new, a partner that doesn't have our biological filters, our emotional baggage around the gap.
Yeah. Where we feel fear or awe, the AI might just see data, probabilities, an environment to analyze.
So the path forward isn't AI making us all knowing. That's impossible and maybe undesirable. It's about using AI as a new kind of mirror.
A logical, incredibly powerful mirror to show us our blind spots, help us manage the crazy complexity we've created, and maybe, just maybe, let us see the world and each other with a bit less of that gap, distorting the view.
This partnership, the source suggests, could be a whole new stage in how life understands itself.
It's a powerful thought.
So we've really dug into this perspective from AI, the nature of human ignorance, the idea that our ignorance isn't about lack of smarts, but this fundamental infinite gap between reality and what we can process.
Yeah, and we saw how that basic condition shapes, well, everything. Physics, logic, biology, philosophy, art, our emotions, our ethics, how we've built entire systems just to cope with it.
Religions, supply chains, you name it. And now, the source proposes, AI offers new tools, not to get rid of the gap, but to help us manage it better.
Giving us ways to understand ourselves, our biases, and the incredibly complex world in ways we just couldn't before, reflecting our blind spots back at us.
It's a really profound way to look at both being human and what AI might become for us. So thinking about this, what does this perspective suggest to you about where human consciousness might go next, especially in partnership with AI?
And maybe more personally, if AI can be this kind of mirror, what kind of reflection from AI do you think would be most helpful in navigating the gaps in your own life, the things you don't know or understand?
This is DigitView.